Hello, welcome to this video. This is an introduction to printing and plotting. In this video we're going to be printing from model space, and in the next follow-up we're going to look at printing from the actual paper space, the layouts. They're called paper space because it's basically where your page, it's based on a page. This white area is the page, the paper. But in this one we're just going to look at model space and look at the printing box. So we'll start by just selecting plot, and you get your plot box up, and at the top you've got page setup. You can give these settings a name. You can add a name, but when you're printing from model space, because you won't be using it for your finished layout, you'll just be doing like snippets or something rough to send your client, and you apply the settings, that they'll be stored for model space. So as long as you're only sort of doing one area of the drawing, there's no need to give it a name. And the next one is you've got to select your printer, and normally you'll be using PDF. Even if you want to print to paper, it's generally best to create a PDF and then print from that. But whatever you do, you can select it here. And the original PDF converter was DWG to PDF, and in 2016 version of AutoCAD you've got these 4 extra ones added called AutoCAD PDF. And they're basically just different qualities, different dots per inch DPI. You can use any of them you like. The smallest file in the web and mobile, they are really small sized and lower quality, and they lack things like layer information. So you generally go for general documentation, high quality print, or DWG to PDF. The DWG to PDF, I think it's 600 dots per inch. The general documentation is 1200 dots per inch, and the high quality is 2400 dots per inch. If you're supplying a finished layout drawing to a client, you generally go for the high quality so that when they print it they'll get a better output. I generally use general documentation. It's better than the old DWD version, and then choose this one for something when it's completely finished. So I'll select that. If you're having trouble with, sometimes I find that some images, if you put images on your drawing and they don't show, sometimes you have to change this setting here to something lower. It's a bit of experimentation. And then you've got to choose your paper size, and for this drawing I think that go nicely on an A3. It's a very small site, so I'll select ISO A3, and as you can see there's 2 for most printers. AO I think only has 1, but A2 you've got 2, and the numbers are the size of the sheet, so the width times the height. So A3 you'll go for 420 by 297, so it's 420 wide, 297, because we want landscape. So I'll select that, because a landscape will go around that nicely. It doesn't lend itself to a portrait. And then the next one is what to plot. The display is the screen, what you can see there, and then you've got the extents. The extents are basically the limits of the drawn entities on the drawing. So it would, if you choose extents, it would go up to this little level here, across to the end of that line, and then it will come out to this level here and down to this blue line probably there. You've got to be careful about using extents, because sometimes drawings have bits and pieces in far corners, maybe kilometres away from this drawing area, and when you come to print it, you just see two little dots on the screen. So I don't use extents, or the display, or for that minute the limits. Sorry, or for that matter the limits. The limits are the drawing limits, and they could be absolutely huge or really small. It depends on what they're set to. Generally don't mess around with those, because you're being supplied your drawings, but you wouldn't really ever draw to print to limits. The one you use is window, and the one missing from here is called layout, which will only appear when you're actually printing from a layout. So we click window, and you just select the first corner. You can see it's asking for the first corner of the area you want to print. So if I want to sort of start there, and I want to show that, and if you've made a mistake, just click this window box again, and you can just change it. And in this little box here, you can see your drawing, which has got these little hatching on it, and that will show it on the where it is on the page. If I apply that and preview it, and I'm going to click always continue, because I don't use annotation scales, so ignore that. And it's down in this corner, which isn't much use really. Now, printing from model space, it's normally just to send to clients to sort of get clarification on something, or to show them what's coming before you complete the layout and spend time setting the layout up and everything, making it look pretty. You just want to send a quick example, so you're not going to worry about the scale. We're not going to scale the drawing on model space, it's not that important. So you'd click fit to paper, and straight away you can see it's got bigger, and then I can center the plot, and it will just move it up slightly and balance it out. If I apply that and preview it, and now it's fitted it nicely. The pen style tables, again, don't really need to worry too much about that. Leave it as none, which means it will just use what you're basically seeing on the screen, or set it to a CAD or a CAD LT, or if you want it grayscale or monochrome. It's up to you. I mean, it depends on what sort of printer you're using. You may have to have some special settings if you're using a proper plotter or printer, but generally it's none. And I generally have plot transparency always ticked, in case there is some on there that came with the drawing. And that's it really for this. This is all I need. So if I apply that, preview it again, everything's fine, and then you just click OK and save it to wherever you want to save it. Give it whatever file name you want, and it'll automatically show it. You can't see it because it's come up on my second monitor, so I'm just going to grab it and bring it down. And there's the finished PDF. And if we look at the layers, yes, it shows the layers, and you can actually switch on layers from the PDF. Like I said, on the mobile versions and small file PDF versions, you don't get this option, so you can actually send it to your client and they can switch things on and off. I can hide the buildings. It's quite handy. So I'll just close that. And don't forget, you can use the Windows snip tool, which just basically copies a small piece of the screen. You know, if you only need to show something small area to paste into an email, just screen snip, mouse down, hold it down, drag, and that's now in the clipboard Windows clipboard, and you just literally paste it into an email. Control paste. But for a bigger site, it's better to send a PDF, you know, for appraisal, because you don't know how they're looking at things at the other end. It might be on a phone or something, and a PDF can be easier. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is just an introduction to printing, the print window and printing from model space, and in the next video we're going to look at the paperspace printing. But I just want to show why using paperspace for layouts is better. So if I just load in this, is the sort of thing that used to be very common 15 plus years ago, 20 years ago. If they say this was a topographical survey, you'd often get the layout stuck on top on model space, and layout the paperspace tab would be just showing model space, but there'd be no setup for printing. They haven't set the viewport up, and they'd basically print from model space. And as you can see, it's got its problems. They have a little sort of border, and the drawing's bleeding through. You can see the topo through the border there, these lines, and the key and the logo area. I'm sorry that it keeps flashing. I'll just explode that, stop it flashing. The key and the logo area, you've got the drawing showing through, which means you have to mask this area off, put a wipeout under there or something to hide all these bits of the drawing. And to compare that with doing it on paperspace, there's nothing on model space, no layout, it's all on paperspace. And because paperspace uses viewports, this is a viewport, which is a window onto model space, there's no bleed through from the drawing through your border, through the logo area. It's really nice and simple, and you can double tap the viewport to open it, pan it around, zoom it, and then double tap outside to close the viewport. And when the viewport is open, anything you draw in there is being drawn straight onto model space. There's that circle. And anything you draw on here, of course, appears in the viewport. But while the viewport is closed, and you can also close it using this little box here, if I just click that, it's closed it. Anything you draw doesn't appear on model space because I've closed the viewport and it's being drawn onto paperspace. And this little dashed line is the limits of the printable area of the paper. The actual paper is the white area. So if I was to preview this, this would disappear after this dashed line. That bit wouldn't show. So when you come to print this, you would select layout here, because you're going to print the layout, this whole area that you've defined on the paperspace. And the scale would always be set to 1:1, and it'll be millimeters, because in the UK we're using pages in millimeters. We're not going to deal with inches, so you would set that to millimeters, 1:1, and tick whatever boxes you need, preview it, and you can see this circle I plotted as finished there, where the printable area ends. And the reason it's 1:1 is because the viewport itself is scaled. We scale the viewport using these settings here. And if I put 2 in there, that's actually now going to print that at 1:500. Ignore all these. But that will print at 1:500 because we divide 1000 by the 2, and it means it's 1:500. And that's all going to be explained in the next video, so don't worry at all about this. This is just to quickly sort of show the differences. So we scale the viewport, so we mustn't scale again here. If we scale again here, it's all going to look terrible. It'll either be tiny or really big. So that's always 1:1 if you're printing from paperspace using viewports. So that's the first reason why you should use paperspace as opposed to model space. You've got to do all this extra work of hiding the drawing of masks. If you now do another drawing and you've set this sheet up, maybe it's A3, and you can just import from paperspace. You can import this layout, you can import all this setting up. The viewport won't be the same because that will be looking at a different area of the drawing, different coordinates, but you'll have everything set up, and you can just select from template, and you can import this template into another drawing and select DWD or DWT. So you can actually import using from template from drawings, and you saved yourself all this work. Well, of course you can't import it from here. You could have all this as a block, I guess, and put a block and stick it on model space. But again, you've got all these extra problems with it, so you should always use paperspace for layouts. And the problems increase when you need to do multiple sheets. If you've got a big site and you need to have lots of sheets to cover it, and use model space for your templates, then the problems increase. If we have a look at a situation. So this is quite a large site. It's about 1 kilometre square. It's an old farm that was being developed. It's many years old, so I'm hoping that I won't get in trouble for showing this drawing. But let's suppose these are AO sheets, and I need 5 of them to cover this site, and they'll be arranged roughly like that. And each sheet obviously has to have its key and logo and stuff. So you would do these as blocks. You would set one up with all your masks, and perhaps have a dynamic block to change the sheet number and whatever. And then each of these sheets would have to be on a separate layer, so you can switch these 4 off when you come to print this one, and then you would switch this one off and switch this layer on to print this one, etc, etc. It's a lot of work, a lot of messing about. And if we look at the paperspace version, if I can quickly find it, there's our site, and I've got 5 sheets here, all nicely set up. And you don't have to do each of these sheets. You don't have to redraw each of these sheets. You do one, get your layout set up, and then you just you make a copy, and then this would be sheet 2, and all you would do is double tap your viewport move it to the next area, double tap, change the sheet number, and it's as simple as that. Literally just a few clicks and you've created a duplicate sheet, moved the drawing inside it, and updated it. Compared, you know, with messing around with these, it's a real no-brainer. Where's my multiple? Oh, there you are. So that's, you know, with multiple sheets, you really ought to use paperspace, and it's so simple. Doing updates, you know, whatever you change on here will be automatically shown in each sheet, and you can batch print these, so you can print the whole lot with a few clicks. You don't have to print each one, it'll do it automatically. And the other really useful reason for using paperspace is because we can use multiple viewports. If I go back to this drawing, get rid of this circle. Suppose I want to have 3 little windows on here. I could just resize that, copy it, resize that one. I'm just doing it roughly. Take a bit more care over this. Copy it again. Bring that back to there. So now I've got 3 viewports, and you might want this, say, as an overview of the site, and maybe I want to highlight this area here, so I can zoom into that bit on that viewport, and maybe highlight this bit down here. And these would all be different scales, but you know, we're doing this in the next video, scaling, but these would be set to different scales, and you'd put a little scale on each drawing. But you can't possibly do this with model space. If you tried to replicate this on model space, it'd be an absolute nightmare. You'd have to copy this drawing 3 times and then chop it up and then push the pieces together and rescale parts of it to get this effect. But I did that in seconds. And for very large sites where perhaps you need to show the sort of main area of the tree survey, but it's concentrated in 2 areas at each end of the site, you can like do an overview and then just have the tree survey at one end, the tree survey at the other, because there's nothing in between. This sort of thing is very useful. It's very handy. It shows the overview and then highlights the 2 areas. So, you know, it's really simple, and next video is going to show it all. And I have used this sort of layout occasionally. Sometimes I might instead I just move these here. Oops. Sometimes I just have a little sort of viewport on a viewport. As an alternative. There's a, you know, you can just play around with it as you want. And the other thing about going back to model space printing, when you have multiple sheets to send out to a client, obviously each sheet is just showing a section of the site. It's also nice to send them a PDF of the whole site, and you can even mark on these areas if you double tap in each one and draw a rectangle, so the rectangles appear on the drawing. I'll just do a quick one roughly to show you what I mean. And if you did that for each sheet, and then you could put a little label in sheet 1, and you can do a PDF of this on model space. No need to scale it. You would just you'd probably do that on AO. It's a very big site, or even I think there's a 4AO, isn't there, somewhere? Let me have a look. Full bleed. There we are, look at 4AO. And again, pick your window. Center the plot, fit to paper. So that's 4 AO sheets all squished together. And they wouldn't print this out, they would just have this as a sort of you know, so they can look at it on the computer rather than printing things out. It's really handy for a client to see the whole site rather than having just the sheets. They'll probably ask for the DWG, so it may not matter, but it just shows how you can mark on the sheet areas onto a model space. And I think that's probably it for this video. I've covered, I think, everything I wanted to. The only other little thing I think I forgot to mention is you've got this offset area down the bottom here. This is just for shifting the drawing over. Say I put a value in there. It's moved the drawing because this is AO. And I think it's, yeah, it's in portrait. It's a portrait sheet, so the Y value is pushing this. You've got to imagine that this is rotated, so it's pushing the drawing towards the right, and you get a red line, which means that some of the drawing is going to be missing from the printout. And the reason for these values is to allow for things like stapling or a binding, where you need to push the drawing out slightly away from the one edge. But generally you would have these as 0, 0. And you'd be using fit to paper anyway, so for model space. So that's it, and the next video we're going to look at paper space, and we're going to get really deep and dirty with the viewports settings, because they do scare people, but it's very simple. It's a little bit harder for Arbs because we get supplied drawings in meters and millimeters, which can cause complications with the custom scale, but we'll be looking at that in the next video. So thank you very much, and bye bye.